but we're gonna go ahead and get started. Um, so just to go over what we're gonna be talking about today, we're going to be talking about the topic of can abusive people change. My name is Cole Williams. I am the lead VP intern here at the Phoenix Center area. I go by he, him pronouns. I'm also fine with they. And then I'm a senior in my last semester. So this is my last semester working with Phoenix Center. So yeah, I'm excited to be here today and to talk about this topic. So before we get into the conversations and the questions with the panelists, I just wanted to go over just again the topic of today. So talking about can abusive people change? Um, Going over first, since we are the Phoenix Center, I want to talk about what the Phoenix Center is. We are the free and confidential resource for students, staff, and faculty across all three campuses. So that would include MSU Denver, CU Denver, and CCD, Community College of Denver. We provide advocacy in our office located in the Tivoli 227. It's across from the pizza place, so it smells really good over here. We have tablings around campus that talk about consent and promote healthy relationships. And we talk about what healthy relationships are, what abusive relationships might look like, and we help people who may be survivors or knowing or supporting a survivor of different forms of IPV. So that would be sexual violence, interpersonal violence, dating violence, and stalking. We also have a helpline that anyone can call. It's 24/7, free and confidential. I know someone will call. I've been on it. I can ensure that. So yeah, just some background information at the Phoenix Center, since that is where we're from. All right. So, and then also just so everyone knows, the webinar is going to be recorded and transcribed. So if someone needs access to it after this meeting, they are free to do so. And then, sorry, I'm just making sure. Okay. So, again, during the webinar, we'll be talking about the topic of can abusive people change because this month is Relationship Violence Awareness Month, also known as Dating Domestic Violence Awareness Month. I've heard them go by both. And this is just an effort on the Rara campus to and the Denver community to promote information about what relationship violence might look like and what it can look like. And again, this will be posted on our website at the end. And so I'll be speaking with experts in the violence prevention and intervention field and asking the question if folks who exhibit abusive behaviors can change these behaviors, and how our culture might create barriers for those who want to change or maybe are in the process of changing and mindsets that some people might have towards these people. Um, and then what is currently being done to address abusive behaviors and what is currently being done to help people who may be experiencing behaviors of abuse. And then again, I just want to, before we start, I want to just some content warnings. We will be talking about, like I mentioned, um, forms of abuse, people who have been abusers, who have been abused, and then things such as trauma, as well as the justice system or lack thereof, which I know can be triggering for some people. So I just want to make sure we put that out there. So if at any time any of the participants or even the panelists need to just maybe take a step out, um, you can feel free to do whatever you need to do, get a drink of water, go to the bathroom, take a walk, take a breath. We also, like I mentioned, we have our helpline that you can call if that is something that you feel like you need to do. So just wanted to create, a good safe space, a brave space, as much as we can during this conversation. Okay, sorry. Okay, so again, before I go into introducing our panelists today, I wanted to go over some terminology that we will be using throughout the conversation today, and then set some, expectations, the usual for participants and the panelists alike. So when we use the term abusive behavior, we're referring to coercive tactics that are used to maintain power and control over another person, because that is the key. In abusive relationships, it's the lack of it's power over someone and the lack of like balance within that. These tactics may include verbal violence, physical violence, sexual violence, psychological violence, financial violence, or other forms of violence that over another person or multiple people. So some examples would be like for financial violence, withholding someone's funds or not letting someone have the money they need. And then physical violence obviously can look like, punching or threatening, and things like that. And then when we use the term abusive person, an abusive person or an abusive individual, we're referring to someone who is engaging in the abusive behaviors that I just mentioned beforehand. Okay. And then just again, some expectations for the webinar. For the next hour, I'll be asking the panelists around 17 questions, and then each panelist will take turns answering the question. So to the panelists, I will pose the question, and then if anyone feels that they want to answer it first or feel like they have something that they want to add, feel free to unmute yourself. Um, Luckily now we can see you all, so thankfully that's taken care of. So just feel free to unmute, and then also to the panelists, if there's a question that I maybe ask you directly, or if you can totally feel free to take your time to answer, take your time to reflect, or you can also just pass on the question. That's totally fine. But again, just putting it out there. Anyone wants to answer, feel free to unmute once I ask the question. And then for the attendees who are also within this meeting, please continue to keep your camera off and muted, just out of respect for the panelists, especially as they're talking and answering the questions, because they are very important. Um, and then for any questions that you might have, there will be a Q&A box at the bottom. So that's where you can pose any questions as you're listening. Maybe something gets brought up where would like some more information, or you need some clarification on maybe one of the questions posed or one of the answers to the questions. In the last 10 to 15 minutes, we'll have time for those questions to be answered. So I'll go into the Q&A and I will say, this question was posed. And then again, much like the regular questions, I'll be asking the questions from the Q&A, one of the panelists, if they feel the need to do so, feel like they would like to answer, we can do that. Just so we'll have time for the main questions to be asked, and then any questions that come up, we'll also have time for those at the end. All right. So now I'm going to go into introducing the panelists that we have today. And again, thank you so much for being here. We really, really appreciate it. And I know the work that you do is really important. So I'm excited to also, I know I am also excited to learn from you, as I'm sure as all the participants here are as well. Okay, so going into the descriptions, it's going to be pretty word-based because all of this information is interesting and I want to make sure I get it all right, because again, it's important. So starting off with Dr. April Alexander. Um, she goes by she, her pronouns, and she is the Metrolina Distinguished Professor of Health and Policy in the Department of Health Management and Policy at the University of North Carolina at Charlotte. She is also the Executive Director of the UNC Charlotte Violence Prevention Center. She received her doctorate in clinical psychology from the Florida Institute of Technology with concentrations in forensic psychology and child and family therapy. Dr. Alexander's research and clinical work focuses on violence and victimization, human sexuality, and trauma-informed and culturally informed practices. She's an award-winning researcher whose work has been published in leading journals, and she is also the recipient of the 2022 Social Justice and Psychology Award from the Rocky Mountain Humanistic Counseling and Psychology Association, as well as the 2024 Carl F. Heiser Presidential Award for Advocacy from the American Psychological Association. She's an engaged public scholar who has been featured in numerous media outlets, including the Associated Press, Essence Magazine, USA Today, and NBC Nightly News. Discussing her research and advocacy work. She also enjoys bringing psychology to the public through popular media and has previously contributed to Black Panther Psychology, Hidden Kingdoms, and The Handmaid's Tale Psychology, Seeing Off Red. So again, thank you, Dr. Abel, for being here today. We appreciate it. And then moving on to Shanae Adams. They go by they, them pronouns. They serve their community in a variety of ways, including being a therapist, educator, and sex positive enthusiast. They became interested in sexuality as a teen through watching Talk Sex with Sue and Real Sex on late night TV. After joining a sexuality education club in undergrad, they developed into a well-established sexuality educator, researcher, and pleasure and activist. Their mission of sexuality normalization, explanation, and melanated representation drives drives them to prioritize the healing and experience of queer, trans, Black, Indigenous people of color, yes, and femmes of color. They utilize an intersectional and indigenous approach with clients and within their lectures and amplify those experiences. And they're currently pursuing their PhD in clinical psychology. So thank you, Shanae, for being here. We appreciate you. I'm glad to hear from you. Okay, moving on to Jordan Schneider. She goes by she, her pronouns. Um, she's clinical director of sex offense specific treatment program, and SOM full operating treatment provider and clinical supervisor teaching humane existence. I hope that was all correct. Um, she earned her bachelor's of arts degree in psychology from the University of Colorado at Denver. In 2015, she graduated with a master's degree in forensic psychology at the University of Denver in June of 2018. And since then, she has worked with various justice-involved populations, and she is currently working primarily with the sex offense specific population. Um, and then she also earned her licensed professional counselor in March of 2022. And she is a full operating treatment provider and clinical supervisor with the SOMB. She is also an approved clinical supervisor. So thank you for being here as well. We appreciate having you. Okay. And moving on to Jeanine Anderson. She goes by she, her pronouns. She is a forensic therapist within the Denver metro area, and she works in various settings, including as the director of forensic and group services at Southeast Counseling Center. Jeanine has training in various modalities and populations, including couples therapy, trauma work, adolescence, evaluating for psychopathy, and clinical supervision. So thank you for being here as well. And then moving on, last but certainly not least, is Natalie P. Halcomb. She's a licensed professional counselor as well as a DVOMB provider. She serves as the forensic and group services manager um, for the center. She is a native of Colorado, and she earned her undergraduate degree in the psychology from the University of Colorado at Boulder and her master's degree in clinical mental health from Denver Seminary. She has been in the counseling field for 5 years, and her training includes trauma or brain spotting, substance abuse, relationship and family difficulties, and as well as mental health concerns, including anxiety and depression. Much of her counseling career, she has worked in the criminal justice system through court order treatment, working with individuals on relationship problems, anger, and domestic violence issues. Prior to her counseling career, she volunteered and worked with adolescent programs helping kids and teens navigate developmental challenges. And she believes it is important to provide a safe space for individuals to gain insight, have a place to develop interpersonal skills effectively, and to work towards holistic health. So again, thank you to all our panelists. Thank you for listening to all the spiels. I think they're very interesting, and we're very glad that you're here. And I know I am excited, as well as I'm sure everyone else is excited to hear what you have to share with us today. Okay, moving along. Okay, we're gonna go right into it. Again, like I said, I have about 17 questions regarding the topic of can abusive people change, as well as what else involves that. So yeah, I'm just gonna get right into the questions. Let me make sure I have them all pulled up. Okay, so again, to kick off the webinar, we're just gonna answer the question that obviously brought everyone here today, and that is, can abusive people change? So I'll start with that question. I know sounds like a yes or no question, but I'm sure there's definitely more insight that can be added. So again, like I mentioned for the panelists, anyone who wants to just jump in and answer the question, feel free to do so.
I have no problem going first.
Oh,
First of all, thanks, Cole. I know
yeah, of
that's a lot of
course.
work and for putting this together, and thanks for having me.
Of course.
With regard to the question, I think it always comes from a place of, I know growing up and you hear a lot about domestic violence or sexual assault. There's always that notion that comes up in community of, oh, once an offender, always an offender. Or if they did it to you, they'll do it again. And that comes from a place of some truths of for some people, we do see those patterns of, especially in dating violence, you might see them engage in domestic violence with one partner and then they do it again. And like you kind of said in your introduction, I think part of it is due to that like lack of legal system intervention or any other type of community intervention. That we do believe that if there's no intervention, then there's a possibility that does continue. But on the other side, where many of us have worked with people with legal system involvement, once a person is caught, they often go to treatment. And that's the place where intervention can happen. And that's what we all hope to do in our work. And in our work, we have seen people change. And so that notion of once an abuser, always an abuser has gone away from me throughout my development and throughout my career, of not holding that anymore because we have seen the capability of change for people.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. Thank you. Oh, perfect.
I have to nerd out for just 1 second, Dr. Alexander. I heard you speak maybe 2 years ago at Breckenridge, and I'm so thankful to see you again. And your work has been an encouragement to me in the field for sure, and I've learned a lot from you. So I'm
Thank
so
you.
happy
I
you're here
saw some
today.
familiar faces and I'm glad.
Uh-huh. Yeah, we're we fangirling in the front row because that sounds about right. Um, I just wanted to add that I think the thing that keeps me doing this work is the fact that people can change. I think when you see it, it gives you a little bit of gas in the tank to go another 100,000 miles because it is hard work. This is very hard work to work with people who've offended in many different ways. But yeah, once you see it, you can't unsee the ways that people can change when they have appropriate effective intervention. So I would agree, Dr. Alexander. I think the more you do this work, the more you believe in that change, but you also learn to discriminate a little bit or discern who can do what. Like you set goals that are appropriate for people. And so, yes, and change might be relative too.
Thank you. That's good. I like that insight. I think that was good.
I'm gonna piggyback off what Janine said. Janine and I actually work together. And I would say when I first started in this field, my expectation was their change had to fit a box of what I thought change looked like. And I think that's one of the harder things about this work is everyone comes from a different background, different, just a different world than each other and than us. And shifting what change actually looks like has been something that's been really helpful for me to see, to work with these individuals who have harmed other people. But yes, to go back to what you said, Cole, at the beginning, it's a yes and no. I do believe that people can change. I think it goes into what does change look like for them based on the tools that they have, based on their history, and based on just like their human makeup, if you will.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you. Okay. Right. Okay. Okay. So I'm gonna move on to the second question. Again, thank you for answering that first question. That was really good insight. The second question is, can someone who has exhibited abusive behavior once be labeled as someone who is an abusive person? So like for this one, it's like if someone is exhibited abusive behavior one time, maybe to one partner, maybe as in one isolated incident, can that person be labeled as an abusive person?
I'm gonna jump in first. Um, the way that we view our people, our clients, is we stay away from labels. When they feel like they have a label, it actually makes the change harder for them to engage in. And it cultivates shame versus guilt, right? So shame is I am bad, guilt is I did something bad. And so when we can lean into the space of your behaviors are, for lack of better words, gnarly and atrocious and abusive, how can we create change in these? Um, that's when I see, and we'll get into this, I know, in the questions, but that's when I actually see more buy-in. When we can take the label away from them and say, hey, what if we focus on what got us here versus who you are at your core right now?
Awesome. Thank you. Okay, cool. Okay.
Can I ask for
As
the question one more time?
sorry, what was that?
Can I ask for the question one more time?
Yes, the question was, can someone who has exhibited an abusive behavior once be labeled as someone who is an an abusive person, excuse me.
Yeah, I think it definitely resonates with what was previously said of trying to avoid labels or characterizations, right? So we can talk about the behavior and say that the thing that you've done is not good and is not conducive, but that doesn't mean that you as a person is no longer good and conducive. So we can really focus that energy towards changing the behavior without making it like a character trait.
Mhm. Thank you. All right, moving on to the next question. Why may some folks not try to change the behaviors despite knowing that these behaviors are harmful?
I'll take this one on first. I think for a lot of individuals, any change is really difficult, even if it continues to cause harm. There's, fear of failure, or we've talked about shame. It becomes part of their identity to be this individual who does these things. Um, and it's what they know, right? It becomes their sort of like comfort zone, even if it's based out of maladaptive coping skills that cause harm to others. And so it takes a lot of internal motivation to finally commit to making change. And change takes a really long time. And so I see a lot of people sort of discontinue trying because it feels too difficult. And so that's a lot of the work we do as well, trying to maintain that motivation for a long period of time so the change process can actually occur.
I also want to reflect. I know during Cole's intro, also discussed like teen dating violence in this notion and in this concept. So, if we're looking at teens or young adults, the second part of that question said they know these behaviors are harmful. Wanting to like step back and take a reflection that for some individuals, maybe this is normalized behavior. So, again, for some people, they might have experienced histories of violence and abuse in their own household by caregivers and others. And so also thinking about giving space for some acknowledgement of that. Again, not an excuse for their behavior, but recognizing that some of this is learned and it's going to take some time to unlearn those behaviors. If all you've seen from loved ones was abuse and talking nasty to each other, really kind of thinking about, yeah, that's not ways to show love. And so doing some unlearning of some of those behaviors takes some time in itself.
I agree. That
I
makes
think similarly, like off of that, like the unlearning of behaviors also has to come with the fact that you have the tools, the skills, the capacity, the support, and the resources to actually be able to commit to a breaking of patterns. For a lot of people who maybe have harmful behaviors or are abusers, oftentimes a lot of those things can be trauma responses or can be just like core beliefs that are coming up for people. So if you've been raised to be insecure, if you've been raised to believe that you're less than, if you have a core belief that says that you're not worthy, then that can manifest in harm towards others in an attempt to try to validate yourself. So they might know that what I'm doing isn't making my partner feel good, isn't making me feel good, but they may not have the tools, the capacity, the support, the awareness to sit down and unpack those core beliefs and to actually make an investment into the long game of behavioral change.
right. Great answers to that question. Thank you. Okay. Okay, moving on. Um, how do you all see our culture normalizing or reinforcing abusive behaviors?
I think that um, gendered violence has been normalized forever. So I think we see it in media, we see it, all around us in terms of roles and expectations. One of the changes I've seen working with female offenders is I would say, it's cute, it's funny, it's hilarious. They can't really hurt you. We have songs, we all have, heard the songs about how to get back at your partner if they cheat and that kind of stuff. And it's a bop until something happens. And I think we've seen I would say an escalation in female violence probably in the last year or two, which is not surprising because we also saw strangulation increase during COVID and some of those things. So I think there's a lot of people trying to protect themselves in more aggressive ways or reacting in more aggressive ways. Um, so I mean that's something I saw. Nat and I have talked before, and we've spoken before about a case that we both shared in which we actually had a female offender attempt homicide and kill herself, which was horrible. And we really enjoyed working with this person. This was actually a very good human being who was struggling with mental illness and all of that was the predominant aggressor. But it was a female case. And so I think if we minimize female violence, we also frustrate women in particular who don't feel like they're taken seriously when they're upset about something. And so I just see that bar going up a little bit, which has led to some more severe offenses. So that's what I've seen.
Thank you for sharing.
I was gonna say along that same line, AFAB people and femmes in general tend not to have the privilege of anger. And so when we minimize the full breadth of emotion, and when then people do experience anger, it's sensationalized. So they end up on Snap or for My Man, right? Those are the cases that get the most kind of like credit. So when we sensationalize fem anger and fem aggression, it directly goes against like the social norms of constructs of what we expect women and femmes to be. And so then they start to become outliers, or they start to become the exceptions to the rules instead of being able to be granted kind of the full spectrum of human perspective and human emotion. I also think that particularly when we minimize the behaviors that femme people perpetuate, particularly on their male or their masc partners, and I think that this also goes for like queer relationships because masculinized women are the aggressors. They are not. They don't get the privilege of being the abused either. So when we minimize that, we silence all the masked people who are victims of abuse. And then we create this kind of like perpetual narrative that like, oh, if you're a masked person and you get abused, you're already less than. You should have been able to take care of yourself. You shouldn't, especially like if you're like a bigger masked person. There's a lot of like downplay. I know that like I had the experience of one of my like 6'6", 250-pound black femme mask friends getting her ass kicked by her 5'5" girlfriend. And so there was this idea of like you have this bigger shape, this bigger physicality. How could you be the subject to abuse, particularly from this person who is of a smaller physicality? And so we really have to expand and open, and we say it, but I don't think that it like really sinks in for people that domestic violence, interpersonal violence knows no gender, creed, orientation, socioeconomic status, appearance, ability. Any and everyone is subject to any and everything.
Right.
Such a good point, and I think speaks to the complexity of all of this too. Absolutely. I appreciate that.
And Shanae also brings up some points of when we think of domestic violence, I think a lot of people are thinking about physical violence. And as they were talking about different identity categories, just thinking about the spectrum of different types of domestic violence behaviors. So, financial abuse and exploitation is strongly correlated with this. And again, as was expressed, that can impact anybody, and that being one of the signs of again, the potential for other forms of violence. So that's something for us all to keep in mind of thinking about different people and vulnerabilities. So that individual with disabilities might be even more susceptible to the financial abuse that's happening in addition to physical domestic violence.
I was just gonna say, you literally, Dr. Alexander, took the words out of my mouth. I was just gonna say, looking at the spectrum of violence, right? Like the cycle of violence, we teach our people it doesn't start with physicality, right? If someone strangled their partner, that means that something else had happened numerous times before, right? It doesn't usually start with being physical. Domestic violence could be stopping someone from leaving the house, even while they're intoxicated, right? And their reason is I didn't want them to drive drunk. So I stopped them. I took their keys, which is false imprisonment, right? And so if when we look at that, and we have people who come in and they say, well, this is what I got arrested for. And then the group is like, oh, that's a bunch of BS, right? That's normalizing abuse. So yeah, you could not have said it better, but I wanted to piggyback off of what you said. Like it starts way before this, and that's what's getting normalized, and then it escalates to this. And then some of these guys are like, well, I would have, or women, right? We work with women as well and the LGBTQ plus community. They say, well, I would never do that. Okay, but we start here, right?
Oh, yeah. That's good.
Yeah, and everything everyone said, but I think our words are so impactful. I mean, if you work with individuals in the justice system, they often say like, I caught a case. And it's like in moments like that too, right? Like, oh, someone just threw the abuse at you and you caught it. Like, that's not it. And so challenging like how heavy, like what those words mean and the intention behind them.
Wow, great responses to that question. And I think this actually flows very well into one of the next questions. There's a question after this one, but I kind of want to ask this next one and then the other one because I think what we just talked about really encompasses a lot of what this next question is. And it's how have you, to the panelists, seen abusive behaviors differ if they differ by culture or identity, which again, I think we just talked about a lot. So I think this is a great question to go into.
Yeah, something I've noticed is some of the cultural pieces, specifically like Hispanic culture. Um, this kind of plays into the justification too of like the machismo mentality and like women are there for this purpose. And my dad, my uncles, everyone they drink and they are emotionally abusive, physically abusive, angry, like all of those things. And so for them, similar to what April had said earlier is they learned it. That's what they saw. That was normalized. That's their family functions and things like that. So I've definitely seen some of that cultural piece play in, and then trying to work with individuals on changing behaviors while not changing like their cultural identity and connection to that as well can be a really fine balance, I think.
Yeah, great.
Yeah, just some of, again, what are certain norms, both for individuals who inflict harm as well as victims and survivors of keeping it in the family or not wanting to report instances of abuse or even friends like normalizing it of, oh, that's just him, that's how they're doing it. So some of this is in our broader culture. So I know we talk a lot about how we normalize, and we brought it up earlier, normalize violence in our culture, and then breaking it down into maybe different cultural groups and how violence perpetuates itself. Again, we just had those examples of mask presenting people and really thinking about how this might come up for them. And then there's a psychology professor, Dr. Jennifer Gomez, who talks about cultural betrayal trauma, which has really stood out to me a lot of when we think about within group dynamics. So, as a Black woman, I might be hesitant to report or discuss abuse by a Black male, given all the historical damage that's been done by the legal system. Maybe I don't feel I don't want to set up another Black man in the system, and that might restrict me from reporting, or my community might respond in a certain way of, oh, you're going to set up this Black male, and that being a intercultural kind of issue that might come up, and really thinking about how do we heal from a survivor perspective and from somebody who's inflicted harm. So I'm glad she's given kind of a name to that and really thinking about those dynamics and bringing some attention to it.
Dr. April, you saying that kind of makes me think about when we talk about particularly movements for social justice, right? A big issue that we experienced, like in the Black Panther Party, was that a lot of those women were being subjected to sexual and physical violence from other members of the party. And it became this idea of, well, we have to, have this push or have this effort forward in order to get votes and in order to have protection in that regard. But even within the party, there's no protection, right? We talk about oftentimes, I think a lot of the focus does get put on the violence that femmes receive is because there is substantially and disproportionately more violence that is received. But we do know that if we operate from a bottom up standpoint, anything that's good for the people at the bottom, anything that's great for the people at the bottom is going to be good for the people at the top. I think a lot of movements in general tend to think if we help those at the top, it'll trickle down. But we've seen time and time again that it doesn't. So when we are approaching how, particularly like in like social movements, even talking about how do we impact like rape culture and the culture of IPV, we really have to think about the people who are most, my brain is on a Disney track. I was gonna say unfortunate souls, That's not what I'm trying to say. The people who are like most disproportionately impacted by the negativity of these experiences, if we tend our energy and our attention towards trying to make that experience better for them, it then thus helps everybody else who's at the top of the totem pole.
Okay, great. I just want to make sure everyone gets to speak. And then again, great answer to that one too. Like I said, I feel like the previous question, this question, meshed pretty well together. I think you all had great things to say. And then this next question is what are some things you all have heard abusive folks say to justify their behavior and the abusive behaviors that they have portrayed onto others?
I bet we could all come up with a pretty big list. I want to jump on and say she was coming at me. I think yes, Janine, something we heard
Yeah, that
recently.
was an hour of our night. Last night was was
Hour. Um, I would say some of the things that we hear are essentially it's regardless of what it is, it points to blame, right? And it's usually blame of the victim or survivor. Um, I rarely hear a lot of things that are like what we were talking about at the very beginning with the intergenerational patterns and violence. I don't usually hear a lot of that initially, but it's more specifically towards their intimate partner in that moment, and then potentially generalized to their typology, right? So heterosexual male will talk about generally women or women, heterosexual women will generally talk about men. Um, so those are the things that we hear all the time is just shifting the blame from themselves.
There's a whole wealth of research on victim blaming, like attitudes and things like that, of the things that you still hear in passing. I know I no longer live in Colorado, but still follow a lot of Colorado policies. It was just this year that they passed a law where you can no longer introduce like victim blaming narratives in court cases. So they used to introduce, oh, well, she was wearing a mini skirt, so she deserved it. That used to be inserted into court cases as justification and mitigation for a person's sentence. So it was just passed this year that you can't do that in court anymore. And that's just in Colorado. So in other states, you can still do that and say, yep, that's what she was wearing, so she deserved it. And other kind of victim blaming narratives. So I always get people in the public to kind of think about how this comes up in just regular everyday conversations and speech. You'll see it all the time. If you go out to restaurants, bars, or whatever, you can overhear some of these narratives. When we see these big celebrity cases, I'm sorry, just thinking about people continuing the support for Chris Brown. Oh, that was a long time ago. And I was like, but it wasn't. It was just Rihanna. It wasn't. It was Karrueche. We know that there was restraining orders for over 5 years for her. We know that he's gotten into other incidents with his mom and other male individuals with violence. And if you go to social media and see some of the narratives, it's victim blaming, and really kind of thinking about how that is so enmeshed in our culture and dynamics. And that comes out when they do arrive to treatment. And so I know this will come up in later questions, just thinking about those factors that make it maybe resistance for change, like our original question. It is some of that is so embedded. I'm interested in kind of cultural dynamics and sex offense treatment. And one of the ones that I've been writing about lately is how religion comes up. So I've heard people say, well, God's forgiven me. I don't need the rest of treatment. That could be true. God may have forgiven you, but we have some work to do. And so, really kind of thinking about what this looks like in the overall treatment and protection of folks to reduce the likelihood of reoffending.
Quick
Similar,
fun
like,
fact. Sorry.
nope, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, quick fun fact, there are power and control wheels that are specifically for individuals who identify as Christians and also other religions. But there's a specific Christian power and control wheel. So when that comes up, there's a tool for that to help them. Hey, there are things that you probably potentially still do that you say is in the name of your faith
hmm
and justify based on your interpretation of your faith. Um, and there are tools that we have now to help with that. This is how I approach our people with that.
Yes.
Um, so yeah, I just want to let you guys know the Duluth model. I love all, they have great wheels. They have a lot of um, different ones. They have the equality wheels as well. And yeah, so if you're looking for something for individuals like that, who are trying to utilize things like their God or their faith as ways to skirt by accountability, there are awesome resources out there.
Yeah, we call it the spiritual bypass. Sometimes when that happens, and I think Nat and I have spent a fair bit of time in the last couple of years working on some material to help in those situations where they're maybe staying in really dangerous situations because of an overall belief system. And there's nothing wrong with the belief system, but in assessing for safety and safety planning, that's important. But also to reduce recidivism for people who might have an internalized belief that this is okay. We have to get in there sometimes because it may be knit in there just as strongly as their faith identity. And so we have to be able to get in there with them.
And then I just wanted to add one last piece. I hear a lot like I was high, I was drunk, I don't remember, as if that is an excuse for causing harm. So that is a big thing we hear often as well.
Oh yeah, that was great. Thank you. I know I just learned a lot. Especially with the religion part. That's very interesting. Especially I know for our office, I feel like that's definitely something that we could use. Okay, great. Again, great comments. Okay, moving on to our next one. For panelists who work directly with folks with abuse behaviors, is there a common theme or attitude within these folks who are genuinely looking towards changing their behaviors? And then just kind of like a sub question is, does it take these folks time to realize their behaviors are abusive, or do they wake up one day and realize, oh, my actions are causing harm, so I'm gonna make these immediate changes? So kind of those two that kind of weaved into one question.
Kind of the work that I've seen working one-on-one with clients who exhibit abusive behaviors. I don't know. I do a lot of motivational interviewing with those folks. And so we do a lot of kind of like identifying where in the pathway of change they are. And a lot of them end up being in the initial stages, kind of in pre-contemplation, where there's some kind of acknowledgement that what I'm doing isn't good. What I'm doing is having an impact. It might be a good idea if I was to do something different. And then I don't really know how to do that something different. I don't really know what the world is going to look like if I do something different. Hell, I don't even really know what something different looks like because this is the pattern that I'm exhibiting, is the pattern that I saw exhibited. And so I'm merely just like repeating kind of the cycle. And so within that, we do a lot of trying to help people decide if these changes are actually going to be more valuable for where they would like to see themselves in the future than they are right now in this moment. I think sometimes what also happens is when people kind of acknowledge, oh, I do these behaviors that aren't great, there's this immediate change to be like, well, I want to do something different. And so we have to make smart goals because these patterns are 10, 20, 30 plus years in the making. You're not just going to be able to affirm your way out of it in a weekend, right? And so we really have to work on setting small and manageable expectations and also kind of like some acceptance and commitment. Because sometimes the behaviors that you've done have caused you to lose this partner. This is no longer an environment that you're going to have access to. So how do you make the commitment to move forward while also navigating grief and hurt and loss? So I think that it's definitely multi-layered. And I try to tell it to people that it's multi-layered, it's not linear. Sometimes you're going to feel like you're taking 2 steps forward, 5 steps back. And that is also part of the process, and kind of like a little bit of like buckle up for the roller coaster, because that's what's going to happen. We might think that we're trying to work on what's happening in this relationship, but what's happening in this relationship is happening because of what happened with you and your parent. It's happening because of what happened with you and a previous partner. It's happening because of what happened with you and your people in this land, in this country, the state of the world. And so we really have to come at it from several different angles to help people build and grow the skill and the tool that's going to allow them to feel competent and capable enough to make a different intentional decision in the future.
Thank you.
I think for a lot of the clients I work with, the the common attitude of someone that's like willing to change and wanting to change is vulnerability and accountability, right? There has to be a willingness to admit, because a lot of times they'll be like, I I've never seen myself as this person who did these really bad things. Like, how could I have possibly done it, right? And there's some denial piece there. And so the willingness to say, like, okay, I did do those things, but it's not a cycle I want to continue. So really being accountable, and then that internal motivation, being that they want to change and they don't want to continue causing harm to the people around them.
I would, to echo what Jordan just said, I completely agree. Accountability, the way that we approach it is accountability is first, and then encouraging vulnerability and empathy second. Oftentimes, if we do the reverse, then they go more into a victim space, which is really interesting. And then one of the other things Janine and I actually spoke at um, the DVMB conference. It's a smaller one called the Summit last year. And we were honored to be a part of a perpetrator panel. And one of the things that I was moved to tears by some of these guys and the changes that I had seen that they'd shared, that they made. Um, One of them focused on understanding that the survivor and family members, so children, understanding that they did not want to be in his life for quite some time. And not trying to justify, not trying to say, well, she's keeping them from me. He said, he told there was victim advocates in the room, and he said, one of the victim advocates asked, how can we help support this process and help bring families back together? And he said, support them in keeping them away from us until we learn. And I was like floored. So I think genuine remorse, and then an understanding that their behaviors are really scary, and that their family should not have to be near them until there is rehabilitation.
Great. Awesome. Thank you for all of your insight. Okay, moving on to our next question. How can our systems, those systems being legal, educational, medical, etc., do better to intervene in abusive behaviors?
I think one thing that was brought up much earlier was really kind of thinking about our criminal legal system. Again, Jordan's heard me preach this, but I avoid saying criminal justice system because there often isn't justice for people in those systems, and really kind of thinking, and that's on part of the survivor and on part of the person who offended in some cases. Again, from just thinking about the trajectory for survivors through the system, not feeling heard, not having systems that are responsive. We still have cases where law enforcement isn't believing folks. And again, that's across various demographic variables, and they hold attitudes towards victim blaming too. So for a lot of this, really thinking about the systemic harms that come from this, and that often becomes its own form of traumas for a lot of people. And so we need to think about at each and every kind of point that a person walks through, and again, thinking about all parties, how are we being more trauma informed and trauma engaging in all of this? How are we taking into account some of the cultural factors that we named earlier? That if we're trying to pursue justice, we're just not meeting the needs at this point. So foundationally, just thinking about your own family and friends groups. Are you somebody who is supportive? Are you someone who listens? Are you somebody who knows resources? I say wherever I move to, I immediately need to find out where are the resources for survivors, where are homeless resources, all of that. Can we put that in our phones real quick? So if anybody we know ever needs it, we can be responsive to it. So educating ourselves, educating others on some of these dynamics we're discussing today goes a long way. And then just again, rethinking all of these institutions and how they're often not supportive of survivors. And again, thinking about how that then informs like our treatment and really thinking about how do we hold individuals accountable for their behavior so we can get to the place of healing.
To piggyback off of that, I think there's a lot that occurs with big institutions like universities and schools, and the lens of like protecting the university or the college or the high school or whatever, or the star athlete, whatever the story is, over a victim or a survivor of abuse. And so I think that is a space where we could be better at intervening in abusive behaviors much earlier on. Um, so,
Yeah, thank you for that, Jordan. So even those larger institutions, so schools, we're talking about the military. So I often recommend like documentaries like The Invisible War, which talks about like military sexual trauma. It's a hard watch, so I'm warning you all now. But thinking about that in The Hunting Ground is another documentary by the same people that talks about college and campus sexual assault. Both of those show how a lot of these institutions and structures facilitate the lack of healing for victims and the lack of accountability for individuals who cause harm. And so those are like starting points of like insights on how, again, it's a whole field or a whole concept called institutional betrayal. That these institutions betray survivors additionally into the traumas and harms that were already inflicted on them. So, yeah, Jordan, thank you for that and kind of thinking about the larger scope of this issue.
I think this next question after that one goes into, it's the same wording, but rather than intervene, it says prevent these abusive behaviors from developing, which I think prevention is obviously a very important aspect when it comes to things like this. So again, posing the same question, with the new lens of how can these institutions, legal, educational, medical, etc., do to prevent these behaviors from occurring or from coming up maybe in certain in individuals in general.
Oh, I was gonna say, one of my passions is Janine and I always say we want to get into the school systems and teach this, because that's where it starts. I historically and primarily work with offenders. However, where Janine and I both work, it's a little bit of a hybrid system. So we also see couples and individuals. And I've worked with a handful of teens actually who've been victimized and who are survivors of intimate partner violence. And that's, just going back to the intergenerational patterns and trauma, getting at it from a younger age, starting in the schools. If I had a different career, I would go and advocate to be a teacher in a high school, teaching literally how to do relationships. I think that would be so helpful. Um, just as helpful, if not more, than some of the things that they're being taught right now, if I'm going to be honest. So, um, yeah, and then also churches, right? As we talked about before, intimate partner violence is pretty rampant in a lot of religious cultures. And so bringing awareness and what does abuse look like in those realms would be really important. So Janine and I actually have a podcast where we talk about cases in the public and like nothing personal, no one we work with, y'all.
Mhm.
Um, but our biggest goal is prevention and getting the word out there of what this looks like and then resources to get help for both survivors and perpetrators. So our biggest goal is starting there and just getting the word spread.
And talking about it differently. So it's not sensationalized violence. It's can we get a hold of this entire society that's fascinated with true crime because they're afraid they've maybe been victimized themselves, whatever. Get them thinking about it from that lens of prevention, or am I this way with my partner, or could I be, or did I grow up this way, and steer them towards getting some help. Our clients consistently tell us, I just wish I'd had this even in middle school. Just this simple curriculum that Neil Buckley, I have to shout out Neil Buckley's curriculum. It's amazing. The care method. She has she keeps adding books. She has a 6 book deal plan going on. So right now she just has heterosexual men, heterosexual women curriculum. But she's branching out into military and she's going into some different arenas with her research. And they read this book and they're like, there's no reason that I couldn't have read this even in middle school. It's not so complicated that our kids couldn't get a little bit more exposure to having a healthy relationship much, much younger than they do.
Yeah, I think this is where my career pivoted and took a turn is I was working with youth who engaged in problematic sexual behavior, and I said, this needs to stop. So thinking about how do we, again, as the panelists have said, how do we engage in some of this prevention early? Again, I know some of most of the attendees are in Colorado, so just in 2019, updating the comprehensive sex ed bill that schools in Colorado who offer comprehensive sex ed have to include a bunch of different things. But some of what was in that bill was healthy relationships education, consent education in that bill. Of really also thinking that it should be developmentally appropriate. So I often get the question from parents, when do I start sex ed? And I'm like, the second that child starts talking, or even if they're born, if we want to go there. But at developmental levels of let's talk about body parts, let's talk about boundaries, and then again, we can escalate from there on. And so really kind of thinking about, again, how can we incorporate all of this at an early age? And there's so many tools and resources out there. There's a curriculum called the fourth R, which is relationships. There's Dating Matters out there that educates people on this, but we don't have it in all schools. So some of this is a point of advocacy for us, especially at this time where we are doing things like they are defunding the CDC right now. And the CDC was helping to fund things like Dating Matters and other prevention tools for us. So at a time where we're already concerned about domestic violence and other types of interpersonal violence, we're defunding some of the resources that are going to that. So we're going to have to double down on all of this of how do we have these conversations if, again, not through these formal structures, how can we as community members have these conversations with young people, whether it's in schools, again, in faith communities. I love that that was brought up by Natalie, that I recently did a focus group with faith leaders. And as we were asking them these questions, and the focus group centered around youth with problematic sexual behavior, so we'll have a toolkit out by end of the year. They were like, oh my gosh, actually, I don't know how to talk to the people in my community about this and if this were to come up. And so, really kind of thinking about future work for having those discussions and engaging people. So, yeah, let's start young. Let's start having these conversations at a developmentally appropriate level of how do we intervene in times of violence. One other thing is, I was doing some workshops on healthy relationships in Colorado for a bit. And there were students who were like, who asked the question, they're like, yeah, my partner threatened suicide if I left them and I didn't know what to do. And they froze. There were teachers in the audience. They were like, oh, I don't know what to do with that. So again, how do we have conversations about these power and control dynamics and wheels and giving young people the resources and tools to address that? So very interesting to kind of see how that's playing out in community.
Yeah, and I would add to that too. We're in a Douglas County, really conservative county. People were up in arms about really any level of education in the schools, which is so unfortunate. And I think Nat and I are in a real lightning rod position here. And I think it's been important to us to carry that well, and to have those conversations well. But it is really complicated, and I think there is a lot of tension around how much of this to cover in schools. But the idea of them having even less than they had before is very concerning to me because I think then for a lot of kids, that's their only exposure to something different, or their earliest exposure to something different might be what they learn at school. And so you have to understand the fear on the other side to be able to speak to it. But having done this for a long time, and I'm very concerned about that. So I'm glad you brought that up.
Great. Again, thank you. Great insight. I just love just sitting and listening. Moving on to the next question. What are some innovative strategies and or programs you all or other folks are doing to address and help change abusive behaviors?
Kind of glad you asked this question because it goes to the prevention piece, and I was like, I forgot it. One thing, and I know a lot of colleges and universities and high schools are doing it, bystander intervention. So, if a friend is in this tricky situation, do I have the skills or tools or know what to say in those circumstances to be able to be someone to intervene? If I see something icky happening at a bar, again, do I have the tools to know how to engage and interact? So at a lot of universities and some high schools, they have Green Dot. I believe MSU might have it, which is like a bystander intervention training. We have it here at UNC Charlotte as well, where we train, again, students, faculty, staff on how to be a bystander. And it has a great research base to it. And then again, I'm director of the UNC Charlotte Violence Prevention Center, and we're trying to expand some of that bystander intervention through some cool ways. So, my colleague, social work faculty, Dr. Annalise Menike, is doing gamification. So, let's make it into like a game in order to give you some tools on how to be a bystander for issues related to violence and then even issues related to problematic alcohol use, which is correlated with violence. So again, can we give people some of these skills and techniques so they know what to do during these incidents? Because we know in a lot of this, when we see instances of domestic violence, yeah, it's your friend overhearing things being said that might be warning signs or red flags. But again, I don't know what to do. And so making sure that us as community members have those skills, tools, and techniques to know how to intervene in these circumstances, know what to say to our friend in these circumstances.
Um, Within the offender programs, one of the things that Janine and I have brought to our facility, are these groups called foundation groups. And so uh, we have a few different types of groups going on here. So our foundations group is primarily for individuals who are, if you know what the stages of change are, who are pre-contemplative to contemplative of making change. So those are the individuals who are on the side of victim, more on the victim blaming side, or I didn't do anything. And so we've incorporated groups specifically for individuals like that versus what the other side of it are process groups, right? And our process groups are individuals who are a little bit further in their change cycle to being able to say, maybe I did a thing, right? They might be more in the contemplative to determination to and preparation to action and maintenance, right? Like they're on this side of things. And so we've brought a little bit of change to how we approach our individuals because if we put someone who's more appropriate for a foundations group in a process group, they're going to blow up our process group and it actually might increase the shame narrative. Right. So one of the things we've done is that, and then incorporating, like Dr. April was saying, other types of things, right? Substance abuse, for an additional treatment, or MRT, moral recognition therapy. If you guys don't know what that is, it's a CBT type of therapy that is curriculum based. DBT, right? We have a few other systems within ours to help individual in parenting groups, of course, to help our individuals be as successful as they can be based on where they're at.
We also work on screening people with psychopathic traits. So not that they're a clinical psychopath, that almost doesn't matter, but looking at the traits, if they have elevation in some of the domains for the PCLR, for example, we don't want to teach them tools to be better at this or to get through treatment better in the future. And so we try to pull those folks out. They might start in foundations, and then we may end up doing some individual sessions and assessing them a little better. And then there's still a treatment protocol. I don't want people, especially high risk people, just getting tossed around from agency to agency because nobody knows how to work with them. And so we've worked really hard to be able to identify them and work on a treatment plan that might actually work. And again, it may not look like anybody else's treatment plan, but if it reduces the risk of recidivism, and if we're looking at dynamic risk factors, I'm here for it. But we don't want to teach them language to become um, more abusive or abusive in a more effective manner.
Yeah. Our agency uses a lot of psychoeducation, emotion regulation, cognitive restructuring, healthy sexuality, healthy relationships, cycle of abuse, victim impact, right? We also got our entire team trained in EMDR, that we are providing and to work through some of those maybe traumas, learned behaviors, but also like arousal and conditioning for atypical sexual arousals, and also in our substance use program, if that relates to their offending. So we are utilizing that as a more innovative aspect of a treatment plan for these behaviors.
Great, awesome. Thank you. Um, and then the last couple questions. The first one being, if someone recognizes that they're exhibiting an abusive behavior and want to change, what resources or information would you give to them to get the process of change started? And kind of to segue also, how could someone, like, how could you start a conversation with a loved one who is concerned sorry, but the loved one and who they are concerned is abusing their partner or family member. Yes.
Yeah, I think kind of the first maybe initial resource to offer is someone to talk to. I think, to the point made earlier, people oftentimes operate outside their scope. So you can be a person to be a first contact, or kind of like a first to be a first contact that can say, it sounds like you probably need some more like professional help with this, like a person who actually has training background and experience to be able to help navigate that. This person can also be helpful for helping unpack other things that are coming up, or helping give tools, or helping to provide accountability, to be able to help this person manifest a reality in which they feel like they can thrive, which is the tagline of my private practice, right? So we work really intentionally with people to help them manifest realities where they feel like they're able to be the kind of people that they want to be. And we talk a lot about like what goes into that and what contributes to that. To the question of like, if you notice a loved one has abusive tendencies, or you notice that maybe a person doesn't treat their partner in a way that feels good for you, I think that sometimes it's really hard to hear hard things from people who are close to you. And because people are close to you, they can oftentimes become a punching bag. So because you said this really hard thing to me that I don't want to acknowledge because you're so close to me, I can take it out on you. So I think that it's really important for people to kind of prepare themselves for backlash, if they do feel like this is a conversation that they want to have. I also think that it's important within that conversation not to characterize the person. So not to say that like you are a bad thing, but to be able to say like, hey, like I've noticed these things happen. And I know if they were happening to me, it would make me feel a way. And so I can only imagine what the person it's happening to is feeling like. I also know you care a lot about this person, and you probably don't want them to feel that way. And so I just wanted to bring it to your awareness that some of the things you do make me feel bad. And I wonder if they make them feel bad. So trying to really focus on the behavior. I don't think that like big interventions or like shock and awes are important. Like you never really want to go to a person and be like, you're messed up, you need therapy, right? Because you want to offer kind of like an air of care, especially if you want them to buy into it. So really focusing on the behavior. And then if you open yourself up to be that support, be aware of what your boundaries look like, right? How far within this support are you able to offer? How much capacity do you have to show up in this regard? How safe are you going to be if you have this conversation, right? With bystander intervention, step one is always safety. You should never do anything if you're not going to be safe enough to do it. And that also means having the tools and the capacity and the resources to be able to do it. But yeah, I am a big proponent of therapy, whether that's group therapy, individual therapy, not chat GPT. Do not talk to AI, go talk to a real human, so that way they can actually sit down and help you unpack and start to put those tools in place to get to where you're going. But that's the first step. People who acknowledge that they want to change, there's a lot of people who don't get over that hurdle. And so even just like a lot of first therapy sessions start with like, thank you for caring enough about yourself to want to change, to want to work on something, to try to do something different, especially if you've never seen it before, especially if it's like a familial cycle you're seeing. So prioritizing your own needs and your wants and your impacts and your reality and your experience.
One thing that you kind of alluded to too is just the recognition that resources are out there. I've had on occasion where people acknowledge that they are engaging in harmful behaviors themselves and wanting to see where they can go get support. And so really kind of thinking about, yeah, there's therapy for that, of kind of recognizing that maybe you're engaging in some degree of harmful behavior and kind of walking through that and getting some supports there. Just knowing that that's out there and that there's specialists out there that could support. Even when one of the later reiterations of the Me Too movement came up, I got outreach from a young man who said, I think I've caused harm. And so wanting to kind of walk through that and getting support on kind of what that looks like and how do I engage in it. Some people who know that maybe sexual behaviors that they are starting to see as problematic, getting early like intervention for that. And so knowing that there's this full spectrum of you might not even be systems involved, but there could be supports there for you. Obviously, folks are mandatory reporters, so if it does reach like that illegal level, there might be some intervention that comes with that. But really walking through even some of the behaviors that we don't always kind of recognize. So uh, there's been more attention to women who engage in coercive behaviors, and it could be like emotionally coercive behaviors. And so really kind of thinking about, yeah, how do I get some support when I'm recognizing this even within myself? And then I think I alluded to it earlier, just thinking about don't know the appropriate word, additional resources like outside of violence. So a person who's trying to leave might need housing resources. So kind of thinking about what that looks like. Food insecurity that might come up with a partner. So thinking about where local food banks and things like that are. So it's not even just like the shelter and the therapy, just thinking about all the things that correlate with violence. Maybe somebody needs linkage to a lawyer to figure out what are my next steps in breaking a lease and things like that. So just knowing that there's community sources out there, and that could start with 311, just calling them and thinking about what else a person might need.
Again, thank you for answering and giving all of your input. The last and final question, which is just, is there, before we move on to the, I think there's about two questions in the Q&A that we can get to, but the last main question that I have is just, is there anything else you would all like to share about this topic of can abusive people change before we conclude and before I go into the two questions that we have in the Q&A?
Mine is always cliche, but violence prevention starts with us. I know that's kind of corny and cliche, but it really does, of just kind of thinking about what we're witnessing in our own circles and how are we intervening in these circumstances as best as we can, and how do we support people, and just changing our minds and building awareness. I know Janine brought up some examples from like media, so thinking about how we consume it, and that's like my side research project, and just kind of thinking about the messages that we get from media, and so how do we talk to young people about that? How do we walk through it? We didn't even talk about things like pornography use, that some of our interventions with young people are, let's talk about pornography and maybe some of the negative messages that come from it. Like a lot of videos don't show consent. They're engaging in non-consensual and abusive behaviors, and so not modeling and mimicking that. And so some of this goes to some larger, deeper conversations we need to have as individuals, and just thinking about what we're seeing in our communities, and stopping some of the cycle. So challenging maybe some of the things that we say. I've had some feedback on like even our use of everyday violence language. So I think it was either yesterday or today. I was like, "Oh, let's punch this up," and I was like, "Oh, like why do we need to always use like violence-oriented language in our vernacular?" But it comes so naturally, and so really kind of re-examining some of this in our communities.
Yeah. Okay, I'm gonna go into the Q&A because we got a couple more too while you were speaking. So the first one, let me make sure. Okay. The first one asks, do abusers like abusing others, or is it usually some out of some sort of desperation or possible mental impairment? Which I know we definitely touched on this, but I think this is also a good question.
I think a lot of people they abuse for individualized reasons. I do think that some people might enjoy it, and that's a whole different sort of thing to address. But I see a lot rooted in like power and control. They feel like their circumstances are completely out of their control, and so they try to control someone else or something else in their environment, which often leads to harm. Sometimes there is, mental health stuff going on. There is a lot of things that can play into it, but our biggest root tends to be power and control dynamics.
Just really quickly to add on to that, I want to just kind of like I agree. I think there's like probably some outliers where there's some sort of fetish with that. However, Janine and I have worked with individuals on the psychopathy spectrum, and I would even say individuals who are on the psychopathy spectrum would say that they don't enjoy abusing people, even if it's to keep them out of trouble. So even to that, I don't know if it's necessarily a desire or something that they enjoy most of our population. Um, and like Jordan said, a lot of it I believe is fear, trauma, and like when I broke it down when I was earlier in my career, I've actually been in the field closer to 10 years. I sent an old bio, I apologize. But with when I first started, one of the ways that I broke it down in my brain was fear of losing control. So they try to gain all this control, right? And so, and by doing so, they hurt everyone in their path and primarily, I shouldn't say everyone in their path, primarily their families and close people to them. But even individuals who aren't necessarily wired to have empathy, I would even say don't necessarily want to quote unquote hurt others. Um, and I'm not talking about serial killers, my friends. I'm talking about individuals on the psychopathy spectrum. So,
Yeah. Thank you for answering that one. Um, the next one is this person asks, what is the line between self-defense and victim blaming? And they say sometimes in the heat of an argument, I'm quoting, there's air quotes, both sides are contributing to a toxic environment. Can you unpack some of this where self-defense is operating, and sometimes people get accused of abuse when they are doing self-defense, which I remember it earlier in our conversation. I think we touched on a little bit. But if anyone wanted to go a little bit deeper into this question, feel free to do so.
Well, I think I can handle this one, at least on the side that I know about, which is having a specialty in heterosexual female offenders. Um, we just had Sandy Campanella on the podcast, and she's amazing because she worked with the DA's office in Boulder for a long time and really helped them work through these cases and figure out was are the charges accurate to what happened and what were the other dynamics going on. And so when you're talking about predominant aggressor, who is the person with the control in the relationship versus how something played out in the moment. And last night, Nat and I, we were doing some work with the contemplative folks, which we enjoy working with them. And the conversation came up of, okay, well, so a man was saying that this woman grabbed his balls, and so he held her by the neck. And so, we did a little discussion around how that would happen, what that might actually look like. And it's not our job to investigate that, but it is our job as treatment providers to say, hey, wait a minute. First of all, is that typically an aggressive female behavior? No, the answer is no. I've never seen that. Now, I've seen that defensively. Sure. It's one of the first things we're taught in terms of how to defend ourselves from male violence in particular. And so, being able to kind of tease those things out is important. And then the thing that Sandy really brought to us is some of the legal definitions around that. Just because someone does XYZ does not entitle you to do whatever response. You can use equal or lesser force to exit a situation. The goal is to keep yourself safe. And sometimes that does look big, though. I mean, there are some cases where maybe someone's being strangled and that doesn't necessarily show as much of an impact right away, or there might not be visible injuries, but the victim might have survivor might have taken the lamp and bashed him over the head with it, and you've got a bleeding offender at the scene. And so there we have to look at these things with nuance, but also that is a pretty common victim blame tactic no matter what population you're working with. And so I think in treatment it's really honest, direct conversations, firm accountability, and just kind of having an open sharp mind about what might be happening in those dynamics and really deconstructing them a bit. And then watching how the person is responding to that conversation too tells us an awful lot. But if you're wondering about yourself in a relationship, first of all, if you're needing to defend yourself physically at all, we tell people it's the train has way left the station if we're in that place. And so that would be my encouragement. If you're thinking for yourself, about a relationship that you're in, we should never be in a relationship where we physically feel that we need to defend ourselves in any way, shape, or form or take a preventative physical action to keep ourselves safe. Like it looks like they might, so I'm going to get there first. We're already in a pretty bad spot if we're there. That makes sense? Okay.
Yes, that does. Thank you. Um, I personally have a question actually. Um, I know I've been talking a lot. For in terms of, I know we've talked about people who have abused in the past and like who are wanting to change. And within that aspect, do you any of you have any advice for someone who might be um say pursuing or like interested in someone romantically or even maybe even just like as a friend or like a colleague who might have past abusive behaviors and have gone through treatment, or maybe we don't know they've gone through treatment. Is there any specific advice you might give to someone in a situation of, oh, I'm into this person, or I'm t talking to this person, or I'm in a relationship with this person, and I know they have these past behaviors? How could they go about maybe prioritizing, like we said, like their own safety, while also seeing this person and being interested in this person in that way?
I love that question. I think one, this is like such a stereotypical answer, so I apologize for that. But I think one, it's knowing what are the signs, right? So educating yourself of what abusive behaviors look like. And I'm not just talking about again like the loud ones. The things that are more what we call indirect abuse, right? Gaslighting, um, blaming, right? Like being late to a date and they're like, "Oh my gosh, well, like someone cut me off and I was late and, traffic, like accountability in small ways." So looking at how have they shifted, especially if we know that they have a history of this, looking at how have they shifted in that and knowing what those behaviors and shifts should look like, right? So, and then also stereotypically, like finding a therapist to talk to about these things and run some things by. I have many individuals that I've worked with through the years where, they'll be in a relationship that they won't really talk about, and then, they schedule an emergency session with me, and they're like, things blew up, and I'm like, well, where we're next time, let's have these conversations earlier so that we can talk through what these behaviors that you are seeing look like and what they actually mean instead of, and as we like addressed earlier, instead of just saying, oh, well, this must just be normal, right? That goes to the normalizing of some of these things, and they're not normal and they shouldn't be normalized. I hope that's helpful.
It is. Thank you. Looking at the time, it is 2. And I just also want to preface with some of the Q&A questions, because as we were discussing, we got some more Q&A questions. For anyone who might, for sake of time, didn't have the Q&A question answered, feel free to reach out to my supervisor. I know has said that she will accept like emails of these questions, and also like these since this is a recorded session, I know some of the questions I think we have discussed prior earlier in the panel. Like I think we touched on them a lot. But again, thank you for all the questions. And then there is a um an email will be sent to the people participating just as like a Q&A, like how this went, how any feedback, things like that, because that's important. But again, I just want to close with thanking everyone. Um, thank you for coming to the panel today. I know I learned a lot. I've very much enjoyed sitting and listening and having even maybe some questions of myself answered or even questions that were posed. I know there's things that I've thought of, and I'm sure people who are other participants felt the same. So thank you so much. Thank you for the work you do. Thank you for taking time out of your day and your work day to come and talk with us and share your knowledge. I mean, we really appreciate it.